Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the National Clean Energy Workforce Alliance, From Theory to Practice. Today, we will be talking about maximizing clean energy and the infrastructure workforce opportunities. I am joined today by a fantastic panel. If you are new to our Alliance meetings, I am with Interstate Renewable Energy Council, also known as IREC. IREC builds the foundation for rapid adoption of clean energy and energy efficiency to benefit our people, economy, and our planet. I am Cynthia Finley, Vice President of Workforce and Strategic Innovation at IREC, and I'm joined today. Our colleague, Dr. Janelle Hills, will be on the phone, and we are joined by our panelists from the National Skills Coalition, Melissa Johnson, Amanda Bergson-Shilcock, and Patrick Mortier. And we will also welcome Dr. Deborah Rowe, who is with us today from the U.S. Partnership for Education and Sustainable Development. This webinar today is brought to you in partnership by the National Council for Workforce Education, NCWE, and our partners at Bank of America. Today's agenda, we'll do a brief introduction about the National Clean Energy Workforce Alliance for folks who are new, and then we'll move into our feature presentation from the National Skills Coalition, Maximizing Clean Energy and Infrastructure Workforce Opportunities, and we'll follow that up with Dr. Deborah Rowe for open discussion and facilitation of questions and answers. So again, welcome to the National Clean Energy Workforce Alliance. If you're on this webinar, you likely know that a good workforce development strategy doesn't happen by accident. And in order to rapidly scale a diverse and sustainable workforce, we need to leverage best practices, resources, and create strong partnership. And this alliance was designed to do just that and connect the dots for clean energy workforce development in a more holistic and inclusive way. We are focusing on every aspect of the workforce development landscape, from new learner to worker recruitment through employment development and the retention of our employees. The Alliance works to break down silos between training, education, and credentialing, funding and program design, recruitment and support of workers, and retention for our employers. And there are a lot of opportunities. I know you all have seen the press releases that are out and the funding initiatives that are about us right now. And so we're working to develop a network where we can work together and really leverage those resources and best practices together. We will put links into the chat for the Alliance to sign up for our newsletter that we have launched. We'll be doing that once a month. If you have items you'd like to include in the newsletter to go out to all of our constituents, please let me know. If you have topics you'd like to include or articles you'd like to see, we'd love to include that too. We'll drop a link in the chat, but you can use this QR code as well to access the newsletter. We also have a LinkedIn page that invites you to join and post to. We've had some great information floating around the LinkedIn page as well, and it's another opportunity for you all to network and exchange ideas and best practices. The Clean Energy Alliance webinar series will happen the third Thursday of every month. We've got some great sessions coming up, so mark your calendars. October, we will hear from Dr. Deborah Rowe and some of her partners on recruitment and retention. In November, we will be hearing from Tremco, Achieving the Green, a workforce development and emerging green job sector, and I'm really excited. That program is a great public-private partnership with unions in serving underserved communities in the states that Tremco has workforce development programs. So that's going to be pretty exciting. We will take a break in December, but in 2024, we've got a great host of topics from unions, registered apprenticeships, weatherization assistance programs, clean energy legislation, and funding. So these are all going to be great topics that we have lined up for 2024. Be sure to save the date and make sure you sign up on our website so you get registration links for that as well. The format today will include a presentation from the National Skills Coalition. During that presentation, please feel free to use the Q&A feature in the Zoom to put your questions in throughout the presentation. We will have questions at the end of their presentation, and we'll be monitoring the chat, But the best way to get your question answered from the National Skills Coalition would be to use the Q&A feature. You can also have dialogue in the chat. We'll be monitoring that as well. After the presentation and Q&A, we will have open discussion and Q&A where you're able to raise your hand and come off mute and engage in the discussion if you choose to do so. So I am pleased to introduce you to our partners here today on this webinar from National Skills Coalition. We've got Janine LaPrade, the Managing Director of Policy and Research, Melissa Johnson, Managing Director at National Skills Coalition, Amanda Bergson-Shilcock, Senior Fellow, and Patrick Mortier, Policy Analyst. I'm going to turn it over to them for their presentation today.
Thank you so much, Cynthia. I'm going to kick it off here. As Cynthia said, I'm Melissa Johnson. I'm the Managing Director at National Skills Coalition. And yes, we are so happy that you have us here today. We're going to jump right into the agenda. We're going to start first with some context about National Skills Coalition and our why for this work. We don't want to assume that all of you are familiar with National Skills Coalition. And then I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Amanda Bergson-Shilcock, to talk about some recently released, so fresh off the presses, data on clean energy and infrastructure jobs workforce research that we did in concert with Blue Green Alliance and Perry. And then we're going to talk about policy recommendations. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Patrick Mortier, to talk about policy recommendations to address the needs outlined in that research through a playbook, also fresh off the presses, recently released this week. And then I'll be back to close out this presentation to give you some ideas of what we want you to do with this data and the recommendations. So know that question that you might already have in your heads, like, what do you want me to do with all of this at the end? Know that we will attempt to answer that question for you right before we open it up for a discussion and Q&A. And as Cynthia said, please feel free to put your questions in Q&A as we go along. Next slide. So starting with the background on National Skills Coalition. At National Skills Coalition, or NSC, we know that jobs that require skills training and education are the backbone of our economy. So we fight for a national commitment to inclusive, high-quality skills training and education so that more people have access to a better life and more local businesses see sustained growth. And when we say jobs that require skills training and education, we're focused specifically on jobs that require training and education beyond high school, but not a four-year degree. And that includes a lot of jobs, including electricians, truck drivers, administrative assistants, a lot of the jobs that Amanda will be talking about in just a minute with the data, and much, much more. You all are all familiar with these jobs and help train people for them each and every day. We're focused on this particular segment of the educational spectrum because we know that the largest portion of jobs in the U.S. require education and training beyond high school, but not a four-year degree. So that's our why as an organization. And on the next slide, we'll talk about our how. We work through expert analysis and technical assistance, through broad-based organizing, through targeted advocacy, and through cutting-edge communications to change state and federal policies, once again, so that more people have expanded access to skills training and education. So we are going to focus on policy recommendations today because, of course, we change state and federal policies. That's a big part of our how. But know that everything we do, including shaping those policy recommendations, is grounded in our network of people like yourselves, people who are training providers, community colleges, policy and research organizations, funder collaboratives, employers and business associations, states and local agency leaders, workforce intermediaries, workers and students, all like I said, people just like you. So know that everything that we're doing, our organizing, our policy recommendations is grounded in the recommendations of our network. And then on the next slide, I just want to level set on terms before I turn it over to Amanda. When we say we focus on policies, we're changing state and federal policies, know that we're using a very broad definition of policy, right? So we're not just talking about bills that pass Congress or state legislation. We're talking about budget allocations. We're talking about RFP language, state guidance. These are policies that many of you all might have considerable influence over, right? And we're also using a broad definition of state policymakers, including folks with the ability to shape these broad policies. And that includes, once again, community college leaders and agency staff, folks that might be on this very webinar. And also, finally, when we are talking about the workforce development system and how the workforce development system needs to be included as we plan for these clean energy jobs, know that we are using a very broad definition of workforce development system. We're talking not only about workforce development boards and offices, but labor and workforce agencies, human services agencies, adult education and community and technical colleges, of course, and nonprofit organizations. We see all of these agencies and organizations as key to the broader workforce development system. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Amanda to talk about this recently released data on infrastructure jobs and clean energy jobs.
Thanks so much, Melissa, and thanks for the opportunity to be here with all of you today. I want to start off by reassuring everyone that the slides from today's presentation, as well as a recording, will be available to all of you after today's conversation. So you'll have it to refer back to. And this data I'm about to share with you now is really just a small snapshot, a little preview of that longer report that Melissa was just mentioning that we've released. So please don't worry about fixating too much on one particular piece of data. You'll have the whole thing to refer to. So in general, the big picture is that Congress has really made three major investments in infrastructure funding over the past 2 years. And some of you live and breathe this every day, so you know this, but just so that we're all on the same page, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, IIJA, sometimes referred to as the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, the Inflation Reduction Act, and the CHIPS and Science Act. And over the next 5 to 10 years, these three pieces of legislation are pouring tens of billions of dollars into communities. And I say 5 to 10 years because the programs in these different pieces of legislation are actually set to run for different periods of time. So some of them are 4 years, some 5 years, and some are set to run for 10 years. Next slide. And of course, each of these investments will have the effect of creating numerous new jobs in the clean energy and related fields. And just to get a little wonky on you for just a moment, direct job creation is, okay, the federal government is spending new money on solar panel installation. And so there are jobs installing those solar panels. Indirect jobs are things like, oh, we're also spending money on the raw materials to create the solar panels. And so there's jobs in solar panel manufacturing. And then there's induced job creation, which is, hey, those workers who are in those jobs installing solar panels or manufacturing them, they're earning more money. So maybe they went out now and they spent money on a good or service that they wouldn't otherwise have spent money on. And so that is adding economic activity and inducing the creation of additional jobs. You don't have to memorize the vocabulary. You just have to be aware that all three types of jobs are the result of that federal spending that's happening. Next slide. So I'm highlighting here just a handful of examples. This is not comprehensive. I'm not attempting to summarize every industry or occupation. These are just little previews of the kind of information that's in the longer data analysis that we partnered with the Political Economy Research Institute, or PERI, at the University of Massachusetts Amherst and the Blue-Green Alliance to produce. In this slide, you can see that we're looking at job creation in the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. On the left-hand side, you can see a couple of particular industries that we're focused on. And you can see in each case what the annual federal spending would be, as well as direct jobs, indirect jobs, and induced jobs that would be created by that funding. Next slide. We also look in our analysis at what are the most common types of occupations that are going to be funded by this new federal spending. In this case, we're looking only at direct jobs, right? And so in the alternative energy and storage sector, in the direct jobs category, about 20% of the direct jobs that are getting created through that IIJA spending in this industry are in construction-related occupations. And so there's some examples on the right-hand slide here, a right-hand column rather, of, well, what are the kinds of occupations that we're talking about? I wouldn't fixate too much on any one occupation or industry here. The goal of this slide is really just to illustrate that even when the category of money that Congress is spending is called alternative energy and storage, there's an enormous umbrella that covers in terms of the types of jobs and the types of, frankly, workforce programs that are going to be needed to prepare people for jobs in all of those different types of occupations. Next slide. Okay. So the next slide, I'm jumping now to the second major piece of legislation, the Inflation Reduction Act. And again, this is just a quick little illustrative example. I'm not meaning to capture everything. On the left-hand side, you can see that we've pulled out two industries in particular, electricity and environmental justice and community resilience. The second column from the left is the annual amount of spending that's foreseen under this legislation. And then again, you have the column showing the direct, indirect, and induced jobs. What this is meant to communicate is this is the scale and the scope of these kinds of investments, and it can help us as workforce advocates and educators and clean energy advocates to think about where to focus our time and attention. How do we help workers qualify for these jobs so that they can earn good money and support themselves and their families? And how can we make sure that this new federal spending really reflects the goals that we all have for this legislation in terms of clean energy and progress on all the areas that it invests in? Next slide. We also, for each of the three major pieces of legislation, we also look at indicators of job quality. So this is looking not at projections of how many jobs we think might be created in the future, but instead it's based on who already works in these types of jobs, in these industries, in these occupations. What's their median wage? What's the average amount of money they're earning? How likely is it that they have employer-provided health insurance? How likely is it that their job provides a retirement plan? Is their job a unionized position? And we indicate this because it's possible for federal spending to create a lot of low-quality jobs that don't pay very well and don't offer benefits. So we want to look at whether the federal spending is actually likely to create good jobs that offer benefits. And you can see here that on the second from the left-hand column, we're looking at the U.S. workforce as a whole versus the additional columns that are looking more specifically at subsectors of the Inflation Reduction Act spending areas, or the electricity sector, or the environmental justice and community resilience sector in particular. So is it a guarantee that because this is the makeup of workers in the industry today, that this will continue to be true in the future? No, it's not a guarantee, but it's a pretty good back of the envelope. And so if we're trying to figure out, okay, what do the jobs in this subsector look like? Are they good jobs? Do they pay nicely? Do they offer benefits? this data can help you start to get a window into those questions. Next slide. And now I'm turning to the third piece of legislation, the CHIPS and Science Act. And again, I'm just pulling out one little snapshot of data here, nothing in great depth, but in this case, we're looking at the manufacturing sector. CHIPS and Science invests almost $32 billion in manufacturing, which obviously has enormous job creation results. And again, the columns here are quite similar to the ones you've seen for the other two pieces of legislation. Next slide. And then the other example I wanted to show is we looked at, okay, who's in these jobs right now? What are their demographics? I think we all know that in the infrastructure industry writ large, the average worker is more likely to be white, more likely to be male, and more likely to be older compared to the workforce as a whole. But in this case, this chart here is drilling down into, okay, in the US workforce as a whole right now, what are the races and ethnicities of workers? What's the gender breakdown? The middle column is, okay, in the CHIPS and science funded workforce, what would that look like? And then in the manufacturing subsector of the CHIPS funding, what would that look like? And then the big kind of takeaway from this chart is that Black workers are substantially underrepresented in the manufacturing sector here, and men are overrepresented compared to women. Right? So this kind of data exists across each of the three big pieces of legislation and across each of the major industry sectors that's in our report. So if you're a data geek and you like to geek out about data, you can take a look at the entire 80-page document and really go to town. If you feel like too many numbers are too much and more than you wanted to delve into, I have good news. My colleague Patrick is going to talk quite a bit about what are the implications of these investments, and the question I like to call, what do we do Monday, right? Okay, this information is all very nice, but what do we do with it? What do we do on Monday morning when we start our jobs? So my last slide here is just going to link you to where you can find the full version of this report. On the National Skills Coalition website, you'll see an executive summary, sort of with top lines, as I just shared with you in these slides. On the Perry website, you'll see the entire 80-page report if you really want to go to town with that. I know there will be questions coming up in the Q&A box because of the tightly scheduled nature of my day today. My colleagues Melissa and Patrick will be handling the Q&A at the end of today's conversation, as well as the IREC staff. But I am also available via email to answer additional follow-up questions following today. I do see that one person is asking about the methodology of how these figures were obtained. That methodology is explained in the long version of the data. So the part on this slide that says full report, that hyperlink, that will take you to the full 80-page document on the Perry website at the University of Massachusetts, and it walks you through their methodology. I'm also more than happy to hop on the phone with folks or email following today's webinar if you want to go deeper and talk about what were the assumptions and how was this data generated, or to connect you with the Perry research team if that's appropriate. Let me turn things back over to Melissa, who's going to, I think, then connect us to Patrick for the next set of slides. Thank you all so much.
And I'll just hand it right over to Patrick to talk about the policy recommendations. So as Amanda said, what are the implications of this data? What do we do with policy to address these workforce needs and to make sure that people are trained for all of these new jobs that are being created? And with that, I will turn it over to Patrick.
Perfect. Thanks, Amanda. Thanks, Melissa. So before I begin, I just want to reintroduce myself. My name is Patrick Mortier. I am a policy analyst with National Skills Coalition. And along with the help of my colleagues, we've put together a series of policy recommendations that we hope will help to build a multi-generational clean energy and infrastructure workforce, as well as enhance job quality, facilitate workforce growth, address attrition, attract talent from typically historically underrepresented populations. Next slide. Okay, So before we dive into the policy recommendations, I just want to provide everyone with some background on the specific agencies that key players such as advocates, unions, employers, and community and technical colleges will be working with as this influx in federal funding is made available to the states. So nearly 79% of federal funding through the IIJA will be allocated through formula funding. And state transportation, energy, commerce, and broadband agencies will have a fair amount of discretion over how the funds are spent. So it's important that outreach, relationship building, and collaboration between those agencies and key players in the state is happening either right now or as soon as possible in order to ensure that the right voices are at the table and that the funds are being well spent. Okay, next slide. All right, so let's look at the policy recommendations, starting with number 1, which is to build a stronger clean energy and infrastructure workforce plan. State transportation agencies, in consultation with relevant stakeholders, such as industry groups, education providers, labor organizations, and workforce boards, are being encouraged by the federal government to develop a voluntary transportation human capital state plan. So these plans are designed to outline strategies for workforce development, training, and education, among other things, in the clean energy and transportation workforce. We're recommending that states take a series of steps to bolster these plans. So first, states should conduct an assessment of their current workforce capacity and identify skills mismatches, as well as training and employment opportunities within the clean energy and infrastructure industries. These assessments should be done in collaboration with local entities, such as employers, unions, and labor organizations, as well as industry associations, training providers, CBOs, educational institutions, etc. The second bullet speaks for itself, in my opinion. States should integrate supportive services into their plans. One example being transportation and collaborative initiatives to provide shared transportation services like van pooling, ride sharing, or shuttle services to ensure that transportation needs of the clean energy and infrastructure workforce are being met, especially in more remote project sites and project areas. Thirdly, we want states to include local entities and stakeholders in not just the planning process, but the implementation process as well. So this can be done through community workforce agreements between project owners and labor groups, and by including stakeholders in both the planning and implementation phases. This means better coordination and understanding when the funding hits and becomes available. And then the last bullet point here is that in addition to setting goals for increasing employment in different clean energy and infrastructure sectors, states should also set goals around investments in good jobs and building stronger and more sustainable regional and local economies. Just as an example, states could and should adopt a performance goal that seeks to drive an increase in the percentage of workers in the clean energy and infrastructure sectors who come from underrepresented communities, including women and people of color. Next slide. Awesome. So I want to provide an example. This is the Illinois Climate and Equitable Jobs Act. It's a great example of state legislation that lays out guidance around planning for equitable job training and hiring. Not only does it target investments for clean energy workforce and contractor development programs in Black and Brown communities, it also encourages local governments to develop plans that expand access to workforce development and job training opportunities for underrepresented workers. It also recommends incentivizing manufacturers in the clean energy industries to find ways to create and retain quality jobs and invest in training, workforce development, and apprenticeship programs. Awesome. Next slide. Okay, so our second example, second recommendation, it centers around investing in industry partnerships, which are a proven model for helping workers enter and advance in a local industry and help local companies support an inclusive talent ecosystem. So for some background, investments in industry partnerships can be done in a series of ways. The first is through funding and grants, by which states can establish funding mechanisms dedicated to promoting equity and inclusion, specifically targeting partnerships within the clean energy and infrastructure industries. This can include IIJA funds, dedicated funds from the state budgets, WIOA Title I 15% set-aside funds, discretionary grants, or grants from other relevant federal programs or agencies. Secondly, states can advance equity and inclusivity by offering financial incentives for sector partnerships that set clear examples and objectives, such as broadening access to education and training initiatives for women and individuals from diverse backgrounds, thereby boosting their participation in the clean energy and infrastructure sectors, and enhancing the retention and completion rates of training programs for these same groups. And then lastly, states can help improve equity practices by providing capacity building and technical assistance to industry partnerships, and by offering guidance, professional development, and access to relevant information and data. So to give you a few examples of what this could look like, this could include direction and counseling from state staff, informing and sustaining local partnerships, customized labor market information and economic analysis, or it could look like information on career pathways, worker training resources, skills standards, or industry-based certifications. States should also invest in research and the collection and analysis of quantitative and qualitative data to assess the impact of these partnerships on closing racial and gender gaps, and establish equity indicators to measure progress in various aspects of employment and job quality. Next slide. Another example I want to highlight is California's high road training partnerships. Some of you maybe have heard of these, but these truly bring industry partnerships and the expertise of workers, labor, and other worker organizations and employers to the front and center. These grants are awarded on the basis of equity and job quality, with the overarching goal of creating economically resilient communities. And the evaluation process for HRTPs is a little bit different and doesn't rely solely on quantitative data, but on qualitative results as well. They do this by promoting worker voice, as well as power change, system change, and culture shifts. All right, I want to touch on the third recommendation now in the next slide. Perfect. So this third recommendation is around expanding access to skills training. And as alluded to earlier, we're trying to tackle the issue of underrepresentation of women and people of color in the clean energy and infrastructure workforce. And pre-apprenticeship and apprenticeship programs offer a career pathway and upward mobility. However, success of these programs hinges on skilled instructors, deliberate outreach, and inclusive environments. All right, so next slide. Okay, with that in mind, our first step is to expand pre-apprenticeship and apprenticeship programs while keeping quality and diversity in mind. In order to expand these valuable programs, states can seek out and financially support community-based organizations and labor unions that have a track record of serving women and people of color to help identify and recruit students for quality pre-apprenticeships. This can be done through grant programs or referral resources, and these organizations can also provide support services to students throughout the program, such as mentoring and job placement assistance. And policies to expand pre-apprenticeship programs, policies to expand pre-apprenticeship programs can also work in tandem with efforts to support local hire and with policies to expand economic supports like childcare and transportation, which I'll touch on a little bit later. And both of those are critical to addressing racial and gender equity. Expanding access to skills training also means expanding financial aid. And this means that more people can take advantage of post-secondary education and training. Community colleges and technical colleges, as all of you know, or most of you know, and probably some of you on the call have firsthand experience with, are essential in developing the future infrastructure workforce due to their accessibility, workforce development programs, and their industry partnerships. States can make this education and training more accessible by establishing expanded financial aid for clean energy and infrastructure careers, especially for students from families with low incomes, students of color, and students from rural areas of the country. The cost of attending college is typically the most significant barrier to employment, so a debt-free post-secondary pathway shows promise by increasing access to higher education and helping to close equity gaps. Michigan's Reconnect program, this is an example I'm particularly excited about, is funded through state general funds. And the program is packaged as a last dollar scholarship, which means that it provides funding to cover the cost of tuition and fees after other sources of financial aid have been exhausted, such as federal grants, state grants, and other scholarships. And so just this year, while previously the program was only eligible to adults 25 years and older, the state got creative using ARPA funding, American Rescue Plan Act funding, and invested an additional $70 million in one-time funding to temporarily expand eligibility to people over the age of 21 instead of just 25. The program is a success so far. Already more than 93,000 Michigan residents have been accepted into the program since it launched in 2021, which was just 2 years ago. And then another way to expand access to education and training is through offering training programs that deliver quality non-degree credentials in the clean energy and infrastructure field. So these short-term and non-credit training programs that result in a quality credential are often not eligible for the federal Pell Grant. which is, of course, the largest source of financial aid available to low-income students. But some states have experimented with providing financial assistance to students enrolled in eligible non-credit short-term training programs. And one of those programs that comes to mind is Virginia's financial aid for non-credit training leading to industry recognized credentials. Its shorthand is FANTIC, which is a long way of acronizing it, but they also have another program as well called the Fast Forward program. And I'm just going to shamelessly pitch, just in the interest of time, that there's more information about these programs in our playbook, which will be shared out a little bit later. So let's jump to the next slide. Okay, so our fourth recommendation. That was a long one. Number 3, thank you for bearing with me. I'm going to touch on our fourth recommendation. So this calls for states to incentivize and support the training, hiring, and career advancement of local residents. So hiring locally has numerous benefits when it comes to clean energy and infrastructure projects. For starters, local workers have a vested interest in the success of the projects, and it helps to address local unemployment and underemployment issues. And it can also reduce the costs associated with relocation and outsourcing, which ultimately promotes social equity. What states can do is align local hiring initiatives with industry partnerships, and that includes businesses, unions, community organizations, and others, to create community-based pre-apprenticeship and training programs that prepare and connect residents with jobs created by new clean energy and infrastructure projects. And while the IIJA encourages local hire, it's just important to note that it's not mandated. But some states that do decide to enact local hire efforts, or for states that decide to enact local hire efforts, they can implement monitoring and reporting mechanisms, such as regular reporting for project awardees on the number of local workers hired, the types of training programs implemented, and the outcome of workforce development initiatives. All of this can help states track progress and make adjustments as needed to ensure that the local workers are being prioritized in the clean energy and infrastructure projects. Okay, next slide. Okay. So before I go into the last 2 recommendations, I just want to switch gears for a moment and talk about what I think is going to be the most impactful mechanism under the IIJA for investing directly in the workforce. And maybe some of you have heard of this. This is Section 504E under the FAST Act, which was passed in 2015. This allowed state departments of transportation to use federal funds under 4 core Federal Highway Administration programs to fund workforce development activities. The percentage of funds permitted to be used and the definition for allowed uses was limited, but the IIJA has since expanded the provision in such a way that permits states to theoretically spend an unlimited amount of money from its $241 billion pot on everything from pre-apprenticeship and apprenticeship programs to supportive services programs in connection with workforce development, training, and education activities. So this can help, this can include recruiting, counseling, transportation, personal protective equipment for workers, tools, as well as childcare expenses, just to name a few. It's what we've discovered, it's a golden opportunity for advocates to work with state DOTs to prioritize and invest in workforce development initiatives within the surface transportation industry. So with that in mind, I want to take a look at recommendation number 5. Next slide. Okay. So recommendation number 5 from our playbook calls on states to provide economic support and break down barriers to skills training and employment in the clean energy and infrastructure industries. This is a pretty lengthy recommendation, so I've broken it up into 2 sections, childcare and transportation. So I'm going to touch on childcare here. Childcare is a major workforce need, and I cannot emphasize that enough. It has the power to connect more working people, particularly women and women of color, to education, training, and quality jobs within the clean energy and infrastructure space. There's a lot to unpack here, so I'll leave you with these 4 bullet points, and there's, of course, more detailed information in the playbook. So the first is to use federal funds to expand access to childcare. This can be done through remaining ARPA funding that states may have. It can be done through federal surface transportation grants, as I mentioned, with the 504E provision. It can also be done through SNAP employment and training dollars for SNAP recipients who require childcare during training and employment activities, or TANF funds, which can be set aside for childcare assistance or subgranted directly to community-based organizations so that they can coordinate and pay childcare providers who serve parents in work-based learning programs. Secondly, states can address the childcare benefits cliff by raising initial income limits for programs or implementing transitional childcare using federal child care and development funds, CCDF, or state funding as appropriate. States can also allow education and training to fulfill all of the activity requirements associated with the child care subsidy program, instead of tacking on additional work or activity requirements, which can have negative consequences. As working or raising children while trying to balance education or training can lead to reduced levels of engagement while in school, and can therefore lower the chances that students actually complete their education or training. And then lastly, because working and training for jobs in certain clean energy and infrastructure industries demands atypical working hours, usually 5 a.m., 6 a.m. start in some instances, states can also use state and federal funds where appropriate to incentivize childcare for non-standard hours. Next slide. Great. So I want to touch on transportation next, because without consistent and readily available transportation, workers may face challenges in commuting to job sites, resulting in reduced access to employment opportunities. States can start by funding industry sector partnerships that bring together stakeholders purely for the purpose of developing and implementing transportation programs. This could mean establishing partnerships for shared transportation services, such as van pooling, ride sharing, or shuttle services, or leveraging existing public transportation options such as bus passes. From the get-go, states could also integrate transportation planning into their overall infrastructure project planning, such as considering the needs of transportation and the costs for the project's workforce as part of the project budget at the beginning. And then lastly, states should develop robust funding streams to cover costs such as bus passes, vehicle repairs, gas vouchers, and mileage vouchers. I think of California's Breaking Barriers to Employment initiative is one such example of using state funding to offer transportation services to people facing barriers to employment, so that these folks can enter, participate in, and complete broader workforce preparation, training, and education programs. All right, next slide. Okay, so without further ado, I want to share with you all the final recommendation, which is around data collection. And since I've used up a lot of time here, I'm not going to go too into depth on the data collection portion, but I do want to emphasize that in order to evaluate the success of clean energy and infrastructure workforce goals, states need to collect and report on disaggregated data to the best of their ability. Next slide. Okay, so the first point, states and regions can develop an infrastructure jobs and workforce equity index that includes key indicators and metrics associated with the state's infrastructure jobs and workforce development goals. So analysis of the indicators and metrics could be used to provide ratings of infrastructure related projects, sort of alluded to this earlier, and the impact that they've had on improving job quality and equity in employment and other workforce outcomes. And then secondly, states should establish a handful of common measures, no more than 6 to 10, that build on the existing WIOA common measures that every agency and eligible entity receives funding for clean energy and infrastructure job creation and workforce development must report on. Third, where appropriate, states can utilize infrastructure-related grant funding or allocate additional state funding to invest in data infrastructure, such as data management systems and data analytics tools. This is a big one. These investments can support the collection and analysis of data related to clean energy and infrastructure project funding, job quality, employment and training outcomes, as well as workforce demographics. Number 4, states can work with their state labor market information offices, as well as state labor and education agencies, to analyze available labor market and program administrative data on the clean energy and infrastructure workforce. States can also collaborate with research institutions, some of them already do, such as universities, think tanks, and nonprofits, in order to conduct research and analysis on infrastructure projects happening in different regions and communities. Number 5, where appropriate, states can utilize infrastructure-related grant funding or allocate additional state funding to enhance data sharing and reporting mechanisms. This can include developing data sharing agreements with relevant stakeholders, such as employers, industry associations, and workforce development agencies, in order to collect data on job quality, employment outcomes, and demographics. And 6, the final bullet point here, if states haven't done so already, they can create surveys, questionnaires, and other data collection tools that capture qualitative and quantitative data and information from workers, businesses, contractors, workforce development agencies, CBOs, et cetera, in order to show how these clean energy and infrastructure workforce investments are impacting job quality and equity, as well as employment and training outcomes, workforce advancement, and business competitiveness. So those are our 6 policy recommendations. I want to thank you all for bearing with me. And I know that was a lot of information. There is more of this information in greater detail with some great examples in our state policy playbook. And I'm going to now pass it back over to Melissa, and she can help wrap us up and talk about how we can put this research and these policy recommendations into action.
Thanks, Patrick. So that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to move from sharing the data and the recommendations to talking a little bit about what you can do with this information. So we have a few ideas on the next slide. So first of all, one option, of course, that we'd love to see folks do is take this information, this data, these recommendations. There's a lot of information in the playbook that Patrick just summarized for you, right? And you can think of that playbook as really like a menu of options. You can look through that and see which ones really resonate the most with you, which ones are you're most familiar with, and you can talk through both the data outlining the needs and the recommendations with state officials, especially departments of transportation, departments of energy. These are the folks who are receiving a lot of this money, who may not be familiar with the state workforce system, broadly speaking, as we talked about at the beginning, right? And you can also, especially if you are already a Department of Transportation or a Department of Energy yourself, join coalitions focused on expanding access to clean energy and infrastructure careers to achieve collective impact, right? You probably knew that a presentation from National Skills Coalition was going to include joining coalitions, right? We've seen over and over again how full and diverse coalitions, diverse in terms of stakeholders type, diverse in terms of geography across different states, they do get the attention of policymakers when they speak collectively on an issue, right? We support state coalitions in 20 states. The link is here and will be in the slides. We support those multi-stakeholder state coalitions in 20 states, but we have connections to many more coalitions, including our technical assistance network, including a network of employers and business associations through our Business Leaders United coalitions in particular states. So we are happy to facilitate connections, and the link that on Amanda's earlier slide, I believe it was slide 16, to sign up for our email list. That signing up for our email list helps us to facilitate connections within states. Coalition participation does not have to be a full-time job. I don't want people to be intimidated by that, right? So coalition participation, we've included some ideas of how that can look here on this slide. It can range from signing on to a particular letter all the way up to testifying in front of your particular state government or meeting with a state agency, right? There's a range of ways that folks can get involved with coalitions. And then for community college leaders, state workforce officials, I would actually, in hindsight, amend this last option for any government employee or leader within a state. You can determine what you can do within your own sphere of influence to really advance and implement these policy recommendations. Like I said, you can think of that policy playbook that Patrick just summarized as a menu. You may be administering a correctional education program, right? And you could focus on infrastructure careers within that correctional education program. You may be already at the table with an industry sector partnership. And you can think about ways that you can advance equity within that sector partnership, especially if it's focused on clean energy jobs. And you can think about ways that you can tell that story about that sector partnership to your state policymakers, right? So there are different ways that I'm sure all of you all could implement these recommendations, and we'd love to hear more about them. And we'd love to for you all to really pick up this data and pick up this playbook and run with it. And with that, I'm going to hand it over now, I believe, to Dr. Rowe to handle our discussion and Q&A. And thank you so much for having us.
So this was just wonderful. Thank you so very much for all of the information. I know some of you are just really ready to dig into the playbook. And so I want you to notice that in the chat is the link to the website, because I know you can't access all these links inside the slides at the moment. And that'll take you to the playbook where you can download it and to a number of other useful links off of there. So go ahead and click on that and make sure you save that so you've got the information. The other thing I want to do is we've got a lot of people here today, and we'd like our events to be very interactive. So we have not done those introductions yet. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself in the chat, because all we're seeing is your name. We'd very much like you to let us know, but also each other know, what organization are you from? And if you have a particular role that you think is important to share. So name, role, organization. Let's fill up this chat with useful information. If you are comfortable giving out your email and you do want to connect with others, of course, you can put that into the chat as well. And then you noticed up near the top of the event, we gave you the LinkedIn group where you can also connect with each other. But we don't want this to be, top down. We want this to be very network based so that you can all collaborate. I also am going to put into the chat as we're talking and doing the questions and answers. We just finished a toolkit on workforce development, particularly for a clean energy economy and an inclusive and just clean energy transition. This was from the Clean Energy Ministerial. It's the international version of what we do here at the Alliance, and we have 100 countries involved. And so I'll put that after you all introduce yourself. When that slows down, I'll put it at the bottom because it's free and it summarizes the 6 months of solution summits and the experts we brought in and opportunities. I know those of you who've been coming to these meetings, you've heard about it before, but now it's available for your use. So hi, everybody. I see David's here. Hi, David from iGen, and lots of wonderful organizations that are represented that are deep into this work. I want to point out to you first that there are a number of questions that have already been answered. And so if you go and click on the question and answer, you'll see that there were 7 questions. They were already answered, and you can see the answers that are right there. But at this point, if you have an additional question and you want to pose it to our speakers, let's go ahead and do that. Okay. So somebody, I know there was a question about Bank of America and what, they fund fossil fuels, and isn't that kind of contradictory? And it was removed because it's not really appropriate for this event. But let me just say something, okay? I have been working with Bank of America for many years. I have also been working with a bunch of other banks, actually 62 climate-friendly corporations, because I have a youth initiative that has gone after the climate obstruction of some of the trade associations, like the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and others. And we went to the 62 climate-friendly corporations and said, how can you support a trade association that obstructs climate solutions? And of all of the corporations that I talked with, particularly all of the banks, Bank of America is doing a lot that people don't know about. Yes, of course, we all need to stop the fossil fuels as fast as we can. And many of us and many of the corporations are on that list, including Bank of America. But they are also so committed to working with their customers to get to net zero, to deal with scope 3 when other corporations wouldn't even touch scope 3. They have people who work in communities all across this country who are truly dedicated to the values of inclusion and community development. It was shocking to me to hear about it. We've had a chance at IREC to work with a coalition of community colleges that they work with, but also these people that they pay their salaries and hire them to help do community development in an inclusive way. So I guess what I'm saying is, yes, we all need to hold all companies accountable. I'm sure the sustainability director at Bank of America would agree. But we also have to acknowledge the good efforts that are going on. And there may be a bunch of good things going on that you don't know about. And I can tell you, because of the time I've been spending with them, that in some ways they are big leaders, really big leaders, and have pushed other multinational corporations. So those are my 2 cents on that. All right. Let me look at the questions and answers. Yeah. Okay. So that's all about the banks. Yep. Okay. It's, valid issues to bring up. I agree, and continue to hold them accountable. And there's lots of ways to do that, maybe outside of the scope of workforce development, but definitely things that many of us are engaged in. But also let's honor the fact that the parts of the things they're doing that are really good. Okay. So, and there are good people inside those organizations pushing them to do more. So here's a question. How can solar developers in the private sector support local communities, especially education systems, to invest in the workforce of the future? So any responses from our panelists?
I can take a first crack at it, and Patrick, if you want to add to it.
Sure.
So a couple things come to mind. The first thing that came to my mind is, are you already a part of an industry partnership about the solar industry? And that works with community colleges, with other nonprofit training providers or other nonprofit community-based organizations that provide supports. We've seen over and over again, like, that is a great way for employers to be involved in shaping the curriculum and outlining what their particular needs are, so that folks can be in a common conversation about how to address those workforce needs. And then on the state policy side, what we love to see is states supporting the convening of those sector partnerships, financially supporting that convening through usually their workforce organization or their Department of Labor. So that's one way that I could see for support. Patrick, what else would you add?
I think that's exactly what I would have said. Yeah. Nothing more to add. Yeah.
Okay, so I just want to let people know that the toolkit for workforce development that I'm putting into the chat right now actually has a description of how to build those coalitions. And if you're not in a position of formal power to do it, it shows you how to do it from whatever position you're in. The second thing is I know a lot of you know this already. Look, every community college has to have an advisory committee. The advisory committee has people in from industry. And lots of times those advisory committees are not what they should be. They're like the instructor's friends who own companies, and those are the companies who get the best students, and they are kind of behind in the curricula, like cold climate heat pumps in the center of their business in order to get to net zero. Just oftentimes isn't the conversation in those advisory committees. So one of the things that anybody can do is to contact the president's office, the dean of occupational programs, and to express an interest in being on the advisory committee, or at least attending a meeting. You can also ask for a meeting with the dean and the faculty member, and to talk about how there's been some breakthrough in technologies around building performance and construction, around HVAC, around the renewable energies, and to make sure that all of that, and transportation, make sure that that gets into the curricula. And we have given you in the past, and if you know where it is, the building science website, but also we've given you all these links in the past to curricula. But also we, you can be a nudger as a change agent in society, right? So you all know, I think you know, most of you, that we went at the U.S. partnership, we went to the Department of Energy. We talked to people. We said, it's got to get into the textbooks. It's not enough to just be on a website if here's the new curricula. And so we convened textbook publishers and found out where the best-selling textbooks were and got it into that. So if industry, because industry can't sit on everybody's advisory committee, right? I'm from Detroit. Equity is a big deal here. And we have like 5 community colleges in a very small area. They all have advisory committees for all their programs. So if you can have regional or statewide these industry partnerships, make it a whole lot easier, and some national groups too, makes it a whole lot easier to get the information out without them having to go to every single separate advisory council. But you got to work with the deans, and if the deans aren't responding, you've got to work with the presidents, because lots of times that instructor is so busy updating labs and doing job placements and internships that they don't always do the update of the curricula. And here's the other piece. You guys on the panel mentioned today that community-based organizations are great for recruiting into workforce training. There's been a lot of pushback. We had wonderful conversations in this series and in Chicago that you can't just pay them for recruitment, that you really have to be equal partners with them, because they know the people from the neighborhoods that we want to recruit to make a more inclusive workforce. And so we need to build trust, and we need to share budgets. You can go back and look at the work that Delmar Gillius presented here in these series and get into more details on that. But the last part is for community-based organizations. If you work with industries, then build a partnership with your local community colleges and private providers too, if they're of quality, so that you end up where that industry doesn't have to keep meeting with everybody separately. We should be rolling out the red carpet to these companies because they are our last shot at stabilizing climate. So we should be making it easier for them. And community-based organizations, if you get a specific training, please make it part of a set of stackable credentials by taking people to the local community colleges where there are Pell Grants, where there are other scholarship funds, where they can do career pathways. Because we had experiences in Detroit where that didn't happen and they got specific training. And then when the jobs weren't there or the job didn't fit, they didn't know where to go. And that was sad. And we can do better than that. And we all work together to help promote. One of the things, you have Janine Laprade now at National Skills Coalition. Oh boy, that's great. She's wonderful, isn't she? Yeah. One of the things that she was promoting in Detroit is that there should be a record that moves with the person, so that when you go to all these different agencies and all these different community colleges and all these different training organizations, social service organizations, there isn't a different file on that person at every single place and they aren't coordinated. But to try and coordinate it, it goes with the person. So those are some of all of those things can help make the industry partnerships better. And yes, Jamie put in the open source curriculum, Jamie Kono, thank you. If it isn't in your textbooks and you want to get it into your curricula, that's got all sorts of wonderful free curricula on there. Okay, so let's take a look at other questions. And I don't see questions in the question and answer. So now y'all get to
Deborah, really quickly on that
Yep.
first question from the solar employer.
Mm-hmm.
I'd be remiss though if I also didn't say that there is also a lot of power in really employers highlighting the need for training, whether that be through op-eds or having meetings with particular policymakers, like I said, departments of transportation and energy who are going to be looking for workers. So we are not making an empty promise here. We're happy to facilitate those connections if folks want those connections as well. So that's another way. So I just wanted to add that piece.
When I get a minute, I'll pull the worksheet off and put it in the chat. But we also found a lot of the solar companies and other types of companies like that. They call the career center at a community college, which is often under capacity and not connected to the faculty. So we've got to help them know who to contact. And that's why we have a sheet on how industry people can connect more effectively with those institutions. Yeah, I'm going to ask that climate core question. But one other thing I want to bring up, which is the guidance to the state energy offices is already going out, and the money is too. So if you're going to advocate, the advocate part at this point is probably at your state energy office, not as much at the federal DOE, because they're going to say, we, pushed it out. Now you've got to work with your state energy office. Now there is a group called the National Association of State Energy Officers. And that might be a good group if you want to work on a national level, but really, and it's important, there's a RFP out that where the states are applying for money. And if they don't put workforce into their grant description now, it's going to be really hard to get money for it afterwards. So now's the time. Reach out to your state energy office, talk about how important workforce development is, and include it. Okay. Shall we go on to the question about the American Climate Corps that was just announced by Biden yesterday? And how do you see that fitting into workforce development?
I can start by just saying that, and Melissa, kind of touched on that. There's no real direct funding tied to it just yet, but to me, it's exciting, and I wasn't around for it, but it sort of reminds me of the Conservation Corps, or sort of like the AmeriCorps is today. But it's exciting. It's exciting to see that there's an initiative coming out of the administration that they're weren't able to get it through legislatively. So an executive order shows that it's still a priority of the administration. And interested to see if there will be some tie-in, some federal dollars tied into that. Selfishly, I'm a hiker, and the idea of them working on trails and contributing to the environment in some way is nice to see. And we can, I think Melissa really did sum it up nicely in the answer, but we can connect folks more with somebody on our government affairs team to discuss it more. They're putting together some analysis of it as we speak, and it should be out soon.
Great. Any other comments on that one? I think it's going to have all sorts of implications, but we've got to see how it rolls out, right? Let's look at the details as they come. The sheets for employers connecting with training programs, I am putting into the chat right now. You can see that's from the Seed Center, where we have all sorts of we have like 1,000 vetted materials for you. I also wanted to mention that you can reach out to the clean energy companies and the energy efficiency companies, all of you on this call today, and you can encourage them using that sheet for employers to connect with their local colleges and their local training programs because they're very busy. They're busy trying to install systems and get jobs done, but you can help them. You can even ask to be a liaison for them. We did that in Illinois with the IGEN, the Illinois Green Economy Network colleges. We reached out to all of the solar companies and all of the HVAC companies that we could get our hands on. And then we told them about how they could help with building the curricula and getting the employees that they need by connecting, in this case, to the community college network in Illinois. So it's doing that kind of higher level organizing, not just in your own program. The other piece that HVAC Excellence and some of the other certification agencies have been pushing for is professional development for the instructors. Look, I taught for 42 years and I needed a lot of professional development. And the guy who taught HVAC with me, he sure did too. So let's make sure that our instructors are teaching the right stuff, accurate training. Okay. Somebody put something, Cal put in the chat that they're trying to cut AmeriCorps funding. They're trying to cut all the IRA funding and the bipartisan infrastructure bill funding. It's all something to not only keep an eye on, but to call your elected officials about and to say, hey, we need to do this work. Don't cut it. All right, let's see what other questions we have. Okay, at this point, do you want to raise your hands if you have something that you want to ask? But you know how we work, keep it short. Don't go on and on and on. Okay, I should be the one to talk. I've been going on and on and on, but with useful information, I hope, today. Okay, so here's a sign-on letter that Cal put in related to what he was talking about. Great, thank you. And the Department of Energy announced $10 million in funding for workforce training for the Career Skills Training Program. And there's a link there. Thank you. Great. I thought it said there were going to be 20,000 people hired in the release that I saw. Okay, so I know you're all busy with what you do, but let me ask you this. You learned a lot today. Can you give me 1 or 2 or 3 things that you can commit to help move forward workforce preparation? It may be stuff you're already doing, and then we want to hear about it. Can you all please put into the chat, what are you doing? What are you doing to help with workforce preparation for an inclusive, clean energy and sustainable and green economy? While you're doing that, I'll turn to the speakers and say, anything that you want to emphasize or that you would like to say in addition.
Well, I was just looking back through the questions here, and it looked like Jennifer had a question about our interest in starting a Maryland or maybe the DMV area coalition. And that's really like taking the bull by the horns in terms of starting a coalition. I just wanted to say that we also have a coalition based in Maryland, led by the Job Opportunity Task Force, JOTF, and they're part of our Skills State Policy and Advocacy Network. They are, I believe, still working on a infrastructure-related report specific to the Baltimore, Maryland area. So love to connect you with them if you are interested. And so that is part of my takeaways. I love that we're ending with this question about what folks can commit to doing. I would just connect folks back to that last slide that they'll have in terms of the options, right? So talking to state agencies, joining a coalition, looking through the menu of options in the playbook to see how they can advance the recommendations themselves. Those are the things that I would lift up.
That's excellent. Okay. Now, this is something that went to the panelists. So I want to share this out with everybody so you can see it. I don't know who the person is, initials AE. I'm looking to tie community investment to workforce development, looking for partners in Florida and nationally. We've got a great opportunity in St. Pete with the Tampa Bay Rays Stadium and surrounding neighborhoods. There are billions about to be spent. So glad you said that. So in that workforce toolkit, and I'll drop it in here again, there's always been economic development money. And it's a lot of money that goes to economic development. And we tend to keep it separate from workforce development or from clean energy transitions. So this is wonderful for you to recognize that's a pot of money that we can hook into, and the economic development agency, whatever it is at your state level, right? They tend to have their own kind of people that they work with all the time. Well, we've got to say, hey, it's time to work with us too. And then you can see what some other people have put into the chat. Got a Bright Futures program, co-design STEM experiences to connect people to clean energy career pathways, a career fair. Yep. So I know one of you in the audience today have put in what's called Positive Futures Fair. And at the Positive Futures Fair, the students identify organizations that are helping to make a more green and sustainable future and invite them to come in and talk about career and volunteer opportunities. We did it for 7 years at our college, and I've seen it at colleges and community-based organizations around the country. And it ends up changing the career pathways of a lot of the students. We actually did some analysis that showed that people from disadvantaged neighborhoods who would typically have not stayed, they wouldn't have had passing grades because of a school district they came from that wasn't teaching, didn't have the resources to teach them to college level skills. And they stayed because they got so interested in this Positive Futures Fair and seeing. And when we asked them about it, the qualitative data said, nobody's asked me before how I can help make a better society for my neighborhood, my family, and for society, the world as a whole. It's so exciting. And then, of course, people met each other for jobs. Fantastic. There's also a resource called epicn.org. Maybe a dash in there. But EpicN takes classrooms of students and has them work on community-based projects. And they learn how to do this kind of work. They learn how to be change agents. So you can look at that. They're all over the world, actually. EpicN. And it's educational partnerships for innovations in communities. It's just epicn.org. That's another good resource. Okay. Anything else? Otherwise, we're going to call it a day. We'll give you back 14 minutes of your day. Thank you for staying after. Hey, thank you to the speakers. Thank you to the organizers. Cynthia, you want to take it home?
Yeah, thanks so much, everybody. Go ahead and visit the links in the chat and make sure your name is in there so we can send out the PowerPoint and the recording of this session. And we'll see you all next month for a great session. Thanks, everybody. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you.
And do come next month. It's really important. We've got this whole national campaign on recruitment, recruiting people into these fields. We've got lots of gifts for you from it, but we also want your input. So do join us. Thanks.
Thanks, everybody.